The line moved in slow, reluctant increments, as if even the concept of arrival had grown tired of itself. Reth stood among strangers who avoided eye contact with the same quiet discipline, each person wrapped in their own reasons for being here. Above them, thin silver drones drifted like patient insects, scanning, cataloging, deciding. Every few seconds, one would emit a soft chime, approval, rejection, or something in between that required further discussion with a machine that sounded far too polite to be trusted. Reth adjusted the edge of his mask with a casual motion, the kind that suggested habit rather than concern. The material responded instantly, tightening its seal and dimming the faint reflections of the world around him. It was not a disguise. It was a convenience. Faces invited questions. Covered faces invited paperwork, which was often easier to navigate than curiosity. Ahead of him, a man argued with a hovering customs unit about the classification of his luggage. The unit insisted the contents were emotionally suspicious, a phrase that seemed to confuse everyone involved. "It's just clothes," the man said, gesturing helplessly. "They are folded with excessive care," the unit replied. "Statistically, this suggests concealment." Reth exhaled slowly, a breath that might have been a laugh if it had been allowed to become one. Even here at the edge of controlled space, absurdity survived. The line advanced. A soft tone indicated another approval. A different tone, slightly lower, more judgmental, signaled a delay. Reth stepped forward, boots meeting the smooth surface of the platform with a sound that barely existed. The architecture around them was designed to erase sound, to prevent panic from spreading. It also prevented relief from feeling complete. A voice, synthesized and carefully neutral, spoke from somewhere unseen. "Please prepare for identity confirmation." Reth did nothing, not because he was refusing, but because preparation, in this case, meant waiting. The system would attempt to identify him through movement patterns, posture, thermal signature, and a dozen other methods that claimed to be foolproof and were, in practice, merely confident. A thin beam of light swept across him. It paused at his face, or rather, at the absence of it. There was a brief hesitation in the system's rhythm, like a speaker losing its place mid-sentence. "Facial data unavailable," the voice noted. "Yes," Reth said quietly. There was a longer pause this time. Somewhere, a process recalculated its expectations. Proceeding with alternative verification. Reth shifted his weight slightly, glancing, not obviously, at the travelers around him. No one seemed particularly interested. That was good. Interest complicated things. Behind him, a woman muttered something about missing her connection. The man with the emotionally suspicious clothing had been escorted to a secondary station, where he was now attempting to explain that folding shirts neatly was not a criminal act. The customs unit disagreed with impressive consistency. Reth's attention returned forward as the light dimmed. A small panel slid open beside him, revealing a surface that pulsed faintly. "Place your hand," the voice instructed. He complied, resting his gloved palm against the surface. There was a soft click, followed by a sensation that wasn't quite pressure and wasn't quite absence. The system was reading something deeper than skin, something it assumed could not lie. Reth had always found that assumption optimistic. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the panel emitted a soft, uncertain tone. "Verification? Inconclusive." Of course it was. Reth tilted his head slightly. "Would you like to try again?" The question was unnecessary. The system did not possess pride, but it behaved as if it did. The panel pulsed brighter. "Repeat verification required." He waited. There was no urgency in his movements, no sign of impatience. Time, in places like this, stretched differently. People rushed because they believed they could outrun delay. They could not. As the second scan began, something shifted in the air. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. More like the absence of one. Conversations thinned, not stopping entirely, but softening as if pressed down by an unseen weight. Even the drones adjusted their paths, rising slightly, clearing space. Reth noticed without looking. He had learned long ago that the most important changes were the ones people tried not to acknowledge. The panel beneath his hand flickered, its steady pulse interrupted for the briefest fraction of a second. The system hesitated again, distracted by something beyond its parameters. Verification, it stopped. Not completed, not failed. Simply paused. Reth withdrew his hand slowly, more out of instinct than instruction. Around him the line had lost its shape. People were no longer focused on the checkpoints. Their attention had shifted, drawn towards something moving through the space with a gravity that technology could not replicate. Reth kept his gaze forward. It would pass. Whatever it was, whoever it was, it would move on. It always did. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor passed through the platform as footsteps approached. Not heavy, but deliberate, each one placed with certainty. The kind of movement that did not need to announce itself to be noticed. Reth adjusted his coat slightly, the fabric settling back into place. His mask remained still, featureless, giving nothing away. The system beside him attempted to resume its function. Verification, pending, it said, as if reminding itself. Reth almost felt sorry for it. Almost. He stood there, one figure among many, waiting for a process that no longer seemed entirely in control of itself. And for the first time since he had entered the border crossing, something unexpected pressed quietly against the edges of his awareness. Not danger, not recognition, but the faint suggestion that anonymity, for once, might not be enough. The shift in the air became impossible to ignore, even for those who had perfected the art of pretending not to notice anything unusual. Conversations dissolved into half-finished sentences. A man mid-argument with a customs drone suddenly decided his neatly folded clothes were no longer worth defending and quietly gathered them, as if hoping invisibility could be achieved through politeness. Reth did not turn. He didn't need to. The rhythm of the space had changed, and rhythm, unlike sight, could not be fooled by a mask. The system beside him flickered again. Verification. Delayed due to priority passage, it announced, sounding almost apologetic. If machines could feel embarrassment, this one was experiencing a mild but sincere version of it. Take your time, Reth murmured. The footsteps drew closer, precise and measured. Not hurried, not hesitant, each one placed with the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to ask permission to move forward. The platform seemed to accommodate the movement, as if space itself adjusted out of habit. A figure passed within his peripheral vision, surrounded by armored escorts whose attention was divided between vigilance and the subtle effort of keeping up. One of them nearly misjudged a step, catching himself at the last second with a small, irritated exhale. Focus, another guard muttered. I am focused, the first replied under his breath. The floor moved. The floor did not move. It felt like it did. Reth allowed the corner of his mouth to lift slightly beneath the mask. Even here, in the presence of something clearly significant, small arguments survived. That at least felt consistent. The procession continued past him. It should have ended there. It didn't. The footsteps stopped, not slowed, not paused briefly, stopped with a finality that interrupted the flow of everything around it. One of the escorts took half a step forward before realizing the movement had ceased, then awkwardly adjusted his stance, as if hoping no one had noticed. Reth kept his gaze fixed ahead. There was no reason for this to involve him. A second passed, then another. The silence deepened, stretching thin and fragile, like a surface tension waiting to break. Continue, one of the guards said quietly, though the uncertainty in his voice suggested he was not entirely sure who he was instructing. Nothing happened. Reth exhaled slowly, controlled, measured. He could feel the weight of attention beginning to gather, not directly on him, not yet, but close enough to be uncomfortable. Then the footsteps returned, but not in the direction they had been going. They were coming back. Reth resisted the instinct to shift, to acknowledge, to do anything that might confirm awareness. Stillness was safer. Stillness suggested irrelevance. The system beside him made a soft, confused sound. Priority subject, deviating from designated path, it whispered to no one in particular. Perhaps she forgot something, another system replied from somewhere above, its tone disturbingly conversational. That seems unlikely. People forget things. Not this one. Reth almost wanted to ask what this one meant, but decided against it. Machines, he had learned, were surprisingly poor at answering questions they had not been programmed to consider. The footsteps stopped again, closer this time, close enough that he could hear the faint shift of fabric, the subtle movement of air displaced by someone standing within reach. Reth did not move. He had stood in more dangerous situations than this. Situations where movement meant survival. Situations where stillness meant being overlooked. This felt like neither. A hand reached out. He saw it before he felt it, entering the edge of his vision with a certainty that left no room for misinterpretation. Pale, steady, unhesitating. The fingers closed around the edge of his coat, gripping the fabric as if confirming something that had already been decided. Reth blinked once. That was all. Behind her, one of the guards made a small, startled sound, quickly suppressed into something more professional. Another shifted position, uncertain whether to intervene or pretend this was entirely normal behavior. "Your Majesty," one began. She did not respond. Reth lowered his gaze slightly, just enough to acknowledge the presence without fully turning. The hand remained where it was, firm but not forceful. Interesting. He had expected many outcomes when he stepped into this place. This was not one of them. "You've chosen a strange method of identification," he said quietly. For a moment, there was no answer. Then her voice came, calm and unhurried, carrying a familiarity that did not belong to strangers. "You've chosen a poor disguise." Reth considered that. "Is it a disguise if I never intended to be recognized?" A pause. "Then it's a failure," she replied. There it was. Not confusion, not doubt, certainty. Reth finally turned his head. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just enough to bring her fully into view. She was not as he remembered. That was the first thought. The second was more complicated. Time had not simply passed over her. It had shaped her, refined something that had once been less defined. The long ears marked her unmistakably, but it was not that which held his attention. It was the way she stood, the way she looked at him, not searching, not questioning, but knowing. That was new. Or perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps he had simply forgotten. "You're interrupting a very important process," Reth said, glancing briefly at the still flickering panel beside him. "Is it important?" she asked. It seemed convinced it was. The panel emitted a faint, offended tone. "Verification remains pending," it insisted. "Of course it does," Reth said. Behind her, one of the guards cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, we should—" She raised her free hand slightly. He stopped speaking immediately. Reth watched the exchange with mild interest. Authority had always fascinated him, not the kind that needed to be declared, but the kind that simply existed. Her grip on his coat had not loosened. If anything, it had become more certain. "You took longer than expected," she said. Reth tilted his head slightly. "I wasn't aware I was expected." "You were," she replied. He let that settle for a moment, then quietly, "That seems unlikely." For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not doubt, not uncertainty, something closer to amusement. "You were always bad at recognizing expectations," she said. Reth almost laughed. Almost. 11 years and somehow the conversation had resumed as if it had only paused. That was either comforting or deeply concerning. He hadn't decided which. The space around them seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether to continue functioning or simply observe. Reth noticed the nearest drone had stopped mid-path, hovering at an angle that suggested confusion rather than intent. Its soft light blinked twice, then 3 times, like it was trying to remember what it had been doing before reality interrupted. "This is inconvenient," Reth said quietly, glancing at the stalled checkpoint panel. "I was almost approved." "You were not," she replied. "I was emotionally close." "That is not a measurable category." "It should be. It would explain a lot of decisions people make." Her hand remained on his coat, steady, unchanged. Not forceful, but not tentative either. It wasn't restraint. It was confirmation. Behind her, the guards had shifted into a formation that looked official, but felt improvised. One of them leaned slightly toward another. "Is this part of the protocol?" he whispered. "It is now," the other answered. "That's not reassuring." "It's not supposed to be." Reth's attention returned to her. Up close, the differences were clearer. Time had not softened her. It had clarified her. The sharpness in her gaze wasn't hostility. It was precision, the kind that left little room for error. "You're going to attract attention," he said. "I already have," she replied. That was rhetorical. "You were never good at those." He let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. "And you were always very patient with them." "I had to be," she said. "You rarely explained yourself. Some things don't require explanation." "That sounds familiar." "It should." For a brief moment, the air between them shifted. Not lighter, not heavier, but aligned. As if something that had been out of place had found its position again, even if only temporarily. The panel beside him suddenly emitted a sharp tone. "Verification." "Overridden," it announced, sounding both relieved and slightly offended. "Overridden?" Reth repeated. A second voice, more authoritative, cut in from above. "Subject clearance granted under sovereign directive." Reth raised an eyebrow behind the mask. "That seems excessive." "It was efficient," she said. "Efficiency is suspicious. Only when you're not in control of it. That happens more often than I'd like." One of the drones drifted closer, its light scanning briefly before dimming again, as if deciding it no longer had jurisdiction over whatever this had become. Reth stepped back slightly, not to escape, but to adjust the distance. Her hand followed the movement without releasing him, maintaining the same quiet hold. He looked down at it, then back at her. "You're still holding on," he said. "Yes." "That's usually a sign of something." "It is." He waited. She did not elaborate. Of course she didn't. "Are you planning to explain?" he asked. "Or is this one of those situations where I'm expected to understand without context?" "You always preferred that." "I preferred clarity." "You avoided it." "That's not the same thing." "It is from my perspective." Reth considered that. "Your perspective has always been inconvenient. And yours has always been incomplete." He almost smiled again. Behind her, one of the guards shifted his weight, clearly uncertain how long this interaction was meant to continue. Another glanced toward the exit corridor, then back at them, as if silently asking whether time had stopped for everyone or just for this specific moment. "We are still at a border crossing," the first guard said carefully. "Yes," Reth agreed. "That usually involves movement." "I was moving," Reth said. "Then I was interrupted." The guard looked at Yeva, then at Reth, then decided that silence was the safest option. Smart choice. Reth's gaze returned to her face. There was something there, something beneath the certainty, beneath the control. Not uncertainty, not hesitation. Something quieter. Recognition, perhaps. "You haven't changed your timing," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "You haven't changed your tendency to disappear." "I wasn't aware I was expected to remain visible." "You were," she said again, the repetition carrying more weight this time. Reth exhaled slowly. "That still seems unlikely." Her grip on his coat tightened, just slightly, not enough to restrain, enough to emphasize. "You left without finishing anything," she said. "That depends on what you think was unfinished. That's not a difficult list. It might be longer than you remember." "It isn't." There it was again. Certainty. Not the kind that argued, the kind that concluded. Reth glanced briefly at the surrounding space. The line had dissolved entirely now, travelers scattered into loosely organized uncertainty. The systems, once precise and controlled, had shifted into something more passive, as if waiting for this moment to resolve before continuing. He had seen environments break before, usually under stress. This felt different. This felt deliberate. "You're disrupting more than just my clearance," he said. "I know." "That doesn't concern you?" "No." "Of course it doesn't." A pause settled between them, not empty, just unspoken. Reth reached up slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of his mask. For a moment he didn't move it, just rested there, as if considering whether the action mattered. Then with a quiet motion, he pulled it away. The air felt different against his skin. Lighter. Sharper. He watched her closely. If there had been doubt before, this would resolve it. Her expression didn't change. Not in surprise, not in recognition, because recognition had already been there. You see, he said quietly, this is where most people would react. I'm not most people. That's becoming increasingly clear. For the first time since she had crossed the distance between them, her hand loosened slightly but did not let go. You took 11 years, she said. Reth glanced to the side, then back at her. I lost track of time. You always said that. It was usually true. Not this time. He studied her for a moment, something deeper settling into his gaze. No, he admitted. Not this time. The space between them shifted again. Not tension, not distance. Something closer to alignment. And neither of them stepped away. The systems around them seemed to recover their confidence in small, awkward increments, like someone pretending they had not just witnessed something unusual. Lights resumed their steady pulses. Drones recalibrated their paths, though several lingered longer than necessary, as if curiosity had overridden efficiency. Reth lowered the mask fully into his hand, turning it once between his fingers before slipping it into his coat. The absence of it felt noticeable. Not dangerous, not yet, but present. Well, he said, glancing briefly at the now idle checkpoint panel, that was anticlimactic. The panel flickered in response. Your presence has been processed, it said, with the tone of something attempting dignity after confusion. Was it satisfying? Reth asked. There was a pause. Processing satisfaction is not within my parameters. That's unfortunate. You're missing out. Yeva watched him, her expression steady, though there was a faint shift in her gaze, something almost reflective. You talk more than you used to, she said. I've had time to practice. I noticed. Reth adjusted his sleeve slightly, then glanced toward the open corridor beyond the checkpoint. Movement had resumed there, controlled but hesitant, as if the space was still unsure whether it had permission to behave normally again. You're blocking traffic, he said. They can wait. They're already waiting. Then they're experienced. Reth let out a quiet breath, something between amusement and resignation. You've improved your answers. I've refined them. That sounds more intentional. It is. Behind her, one of the guards shifted again, clearly torn between interrupting and preserving his own sense of professional survival. He leaned slightly toward another. How long do we allow this? He whispered. As long as she decides, the other replied. That's not a measurable duration. It is if you stop measuring. The first guard frowned, then nodded as if that somehow made sense. Reth's attention returned to Yeva. The moment stretched, not uncomfortably, but with a quiet density that suggested something unresolved. You're different, he said. So are you. That's less surprising. It shouldn't be. Reth tilted his head slightly. You expected me to stay the same? I expected you to return sooner. That's not the same thing. It is when time matters. Reth considered that, his gaze drifting briefly past her, as if measuring something unseen. Time always matters, he said. It's just rarely cooperative. You made it uncooperative. That's a strong accusation. It's an accurate one. He almost smiled again, but this time it didn't fully form. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, the movement subtle but deliberate. You're still holding on to that, he said, glancing down at where her hand remained on his coat. Yes, that's consistent. I try to be. Even after 11 years? Especially after 11 years. The simplicity of the answer lingered longer than expected. Reth exhaled slowly, then reached up, not to remove her hand, but to lightly touch her wrist. Not pushing, not pulling, just acknowledging. Her grip loosened slightly, enough to register the contact, but she did not step back. You're not what I remember, he said quietly. You've said that. I'm confirming it. And? Reth's gaze met hers fully now. No mask, no barrier, no distraction. And I don't think I understood what I was remembering. For a moment there was no response. Then very faintly, something shifted in her expression. Not uncertainty, not vulnerability, but something closer to recognition of a different kind. That's inconvenient, she said. It usually is. I preferred when you were more certain. I preferred when certainty wasn't misleading. It still is. That's reassuring. A small silence followed, but this one was lighter, less weighted by what had been unsaid. Behind them, the checkpoint systems attempted to reassert structure. "Please proceed to the designated exit," one announced, its tone slightly louder than necessary, as if volume might restore authority. Reth glanced over his shoulder. "They're getting impatient." "They always are." "You're ignoring them." "I'm prioritizing." "That sounds like something a queen would say." "It is something a queen says." Reth nodded once. "Fair enough." He looked back toward the corridor again, then at her. "If I move," he said, "are you going to stop me?" "Yes." "That's very direct." "It's efficient." There's that word again. "It works." Reth sighed softly, though there was no real frustration in it. "I was planning to leave quietly," he said. "You were planning to disappear." "That's a more dramatic way of saying the same thing." "It's a more accurate way." "Accuracy is subjective." "Not in this case." Reth studied her for a moment longer, then let out a quiet breath. "You always did have a way of removing options," he said. "I prefer clarity. You used to tolerate ambiguity. I learned not to." "From me?" "Among other things." He nodded slightly, accepting that without argument. Around them, movement continued to hesitate, systems still recalibrating around a moment they could not fully process. Reth glanced once more at the space beyond, then back at her. "Well," he said, his tone quieter now, more settled, "this is going to complicate things." "Yes," she replied. A brief pause. Then almost imperceptibly, the corner of her mouth shifted. Reth noticed. Of course he did. "And you're not concerned," he said. "No." "Of course you're not." He let the words settle, then added almost under his breath, "That would have made this easier." "I'm not interested in easy." "I remember." Another pause. This one longer. Not uncomfortable. Just full. Then, without releasing him entirely, she stepped slightly to the side, just enough to indicate direction, not distance, an invitation, or a decision. Reth looked at the space she had created, then back at her. "You're still deciding for both of us," he said. "Yes." He considered that for a moment. Then with a faint, almost reluctant smile, he said, "That's also consistent." And for the first time since she had stopped him, he moved, just enough to follow, not enough to lead. They did not walk like strangers leaving a checkpoint. The corridor adjusted its lighting as they entered, recognizing authority before identity, softening into a guided path that curved subtly ahead. The walls carried embedded circuitry that pulsed in quiet intervals, like a heartbeat that had learned patience. Reth noticed the shift immediately. "You've improved the infrastructure," he said, glancing at the walls. "It listens now," Yeva replied. "That sounds unsettling." "It responds to movement, intent, threat levels. So if I decide to run, it will know." Reth nodded slowly. "And here I thought I was still unpredictable." "You are," she said, "just not invisible." Behind them, the guards followed at a respectful distance, their steps synchronized enough to suggest training, but not enough to suggest comfort. One of them glanced at the walls as they passed. "I still don't trust that it listens," he muttered. "It doesn't listen to you," another replied. "That's worse." Reth almost laughed, the sound quiet but genuine. The corridor stretched ahead, branching occasionally into smaller passageways where officials moved quickly, avoiding eye contact in the practiced way of people who understood hierarchy very well. "You've reorganized the flow," Reth said. "It was inefficient before." "It worked." "It tolerated errors." That's usually how systems survive. "I don't build systems to survive errors," she said. "I build them to prevent them." Reth tilted his head slightly. "That sounds exhausting." "It is. You always did prefer difficult solutions. They last longer. That depends on what you're trying to preserve." She didn't answer that immediately. Instead, she continued forward, her pace steady, her direction clear. Reth followed without resistance, though his gaze moved constantly, taking in details, measuring distances, mapping exits out of habit. "You're still analyzing," she said without looking at him. "I'm still alive." "That's not the same thing." "It is from my perspective." She allowed that to pass without correction. A thin line of light appeared across the floor ahead, then dissolved as they approached. A scanner embedded in the ceiling adjusted its focus, then dimmed again. Adaptive clearance, Reth said. Yes. So everything here recognizes you. Yes. And now apparently, me. Yes. He exhaled slowly. That's concerning. It's intentional. That doesn't make it less concerning. It should. It doesn't. Behind them, one of the guards spoke quietly. Is he always like this? Yes, Yeva said. Reth glanced back briefly. You say that like it's a flaw. It's a pattern. Patterns are useful. They're predictable. Only if you understand them. She stopped walking. Not abruptly, not dramatically. Just a quiet halt that caused the corridor's lighting to pause its subtle adjustments. Reth took one more step before noticing, then stopped as well, turning slightly toward her. You left, she said. There was no accusation in the words, no raised tone, just a statement placed carefully into the space between them. Reth looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. I moved, he said. That's not the same. It is when staying isn't an option. You didn't ask. You didn't offer. A brief silence settled, not sharp, not soft, just present. Behind them, the guards exchanged a glance, then quickly looked away, as if the act of witnessing this conversation required permission they did not have. Reth shifted his weight slightly. I didn't think you'd notice. I did. I didn't think you'd remember. I did. I didn't think it would matter. It did. Each answer came without hesitation, each one landing with a precision that left little room for interpretation. Reth let out a quiet breath, his gaze drifting briefly to the side before returning to her. That's inconvenient, he said. You've said that before. It's still true. She studied him for a moment, her expression steady but not unchanging. There was something beneath it, something quieter, less controlled. You disappeared without finishing anything, she said again. Reth considered the words carefully this time, as if weighing them against something older, something less defined. Maybe I thought it was finished, he said. It wasn't. That depends on perspective. It doesn't. There it was again. Certainty, unyielding. Reth looked down briefly, then back at her, his expression shifting. Not softer, not harder, but more focused. You've become very sure of things, he said. I've had time. Time doesn't usually make people more certain. It does when they stop avoiding answers. Reth almost smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I wasn't avoiding, he said. You were. That's your interpretation. It's accurate. He let that settle, then shook his head slightly. You've improved your arguments. I've refined them. There it is again. It works. Reth exhaled slowly, then glanced down the corridor ahead. It stretched further than it should have, the perspective subtly distorted by design. Longer, more controlled, more contained. You've changed this place, he said. Yes. It feels tighter. It's more stable. Those aren't always the same thing. They are when instability becomes a risk. Reth nodded once, as if acknowledging the logic without fully agreeing with it. Behind them, the guards shifted again, one of them clearing his throat carefully. Your Majesty, he said, we are approaching a restricted sector. I'm aware, she replied. Reth raised an eyebrow slightly. Restricted for me? Yes. That's unfortunate. It doesn't apply right now. That's even more concerning. It's intentional. Of course it is. He let out a quiet breath, then looked back at her. You've removed a lot of variables, he said. I've reduced uncertainty. That's not always an improvement. It is when uncertainty leads to loss. Reth didn't respond immediately. For a moment his gaze shifted. Just slightly, just enough to suggest that something in her words had reached further than the surface. Then he straightened, the moment passing without acknowledgement. Well, he said, his tone lighter again, if I'm being escorted into a restricted area, I assume this is where things become more complicated. Yes, she said. A brief pause, then, almost imperceptibly, she added, they already are. Reth glanced at her, studying the subtle shift in her voice, then let out a quiet, almost amused breath. Gooding, he said. I was starting to think this would be simple. It won't be. It never is. And with that, they continued forward, the corridor narrowing slightly as if guiding them towards something that had been waiting longer than either of them had intended to return. The corridor narrowed further until the architecture itself seemed to make a decision on their behalf. The lights dimmed slightly, not darker, just more focused, guiding them forward with quiet insistence. The air changed too, cleaner, sharper, as if filtered through systems that distrusted imperfection. Reth noticed immediately. Restricted usually means uncomfortable, he said, glancing at the walls. It means controlled, Yiva replied. That's just a more polite word for uncomfortable. It depends on who's being controlled. Reth gave a small nod. That would explain why I'm starting to feel very uncomfortable. Behind them, the guards slowed their pace slightly as they reached a threshold marked only by a thin, almost invisible line of light across the floor. As Yeva stepped over it, the line dissolved. When Reth followed, it hesitated for a fraction of a second before disappearing entirely. One of the guards muttered, "It's adapting again." "It's always adapting," another replied. "That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be." Reth glanced back briefly. "You should consider a different slogan for this place." "No one asked you," the first guard said. "That's fair," Reth replied. "I tend to contribute anyway." They reached a door that didn't look like a door, just a seamless section of the wall that acknowledged their presence by ceasing to exist. The space beyond opened into a wide chamber, quiet and precise, filled with structures that seemed less built and more arranged. At the center, a suspended field of light shifted slowly, forming patterns that resembled maps but refused to stay still long enough to be understood. Reth stepped inside, his gaze lifting slightly as he studied the shifting display. "That's new," he said. "Yes. I don't understand it. You're not supposed to. That's reassuring in a different way." The wall behind them sealed without sound. The guards stopped at the threshold, exchanging a brief look before one of them spoke. "We remain here," he said. "Yes," Yeva replied. Reth glanced back. "You're not coming in?" The guard shook his head. "This area responds to her." "And not to you?" "It tolerates us." "That sounds like a very polite threat." "It is." Reth turned back toward the center of the room, his attention returning to the shifting light. It moved in layers, intersecting, separating, reforming, patterns within patterns, too precise to be random, too fluid to be fixed. "What is it?" he asked. "A record," Yeva said. "Of what?" She stepped forward, the light adjusting slightly as if recognizing her presence. The pattern slowed, not stopping, but becoming clearer, more deliberate. "Of movement," she said. "Decisions. Paths taken. Paths avoided." Reth folded his arms loosely. "That sounds like a very complicated way of saying history." "It's more than history. It usually is." She glanced at him briefly. "It shows probabilities." "Of the past?" "Of what the past creates." Reth tilted his head, studying the shifting lines more closely. "So this tells you what might happen." "It tells me what is likely." "And you trust it?" "I use it." "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." Reth stepped closer, the light reflecting faintly across his face. For a moment it traced his features, then shifted away, as if deciding he was not the primary subject. "That seems rude," he said. "It doesn't recognize you as a variable yet." "That's even ruder." "It will." "I'm not sure how I feel about that." "You'll adapt." "I usually do." A faint shift passed through the display, one of the patterns sharpening briefly before dissolving again. Reth's gaze followed it instinctively. "You brought me here for this?" he asked. "No." "Good. I was starting to feel like a diagram." "You're not a diagram." "That's reassuring." "You're a disruption." Reth paused. Then slowly he looked at her. "That sounds less reassuring." "It's not meant to be." He let out a quiet breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. "You've improved your vocabulary." "I've refined it." "There it is again." "It works." Reth shook his head slightly, then glanced back at the shifting light. "So where do I fit into this disruption?" She stepped closer, the patterns responding again, slowing further, aligning in ways that suggested recognition. "You were here before," she said. Reth's gaze sharpened slightly. Here? In the system? That seems unlikely. It isn't. I don't remember being part of a predictive model. You weren't. Then how? You affected it. Reth frowned slightly, studying the patterns more carefully now. For a moment, something flickered, a configuration that almost made sense, almost formed something recognizable. Then it was gone. That's very vague, he said. It's accurate. I prefer clarity. You avoid it. That's still not the same thing. It is from my perspective. Reth exhaled slowly, then stepped back slightly, as if the light had come too close. You're saying I changed something, he said. Yes. And now I'm back, and that matters. Yes. That sounds like responsibility. It is. Reth let out a quiet breath. I was hoping it wasn't. You rarely get what you hope for. That's been my experience. A brief silence settled between them, filled not with tension, but with something heavier. Recognition, perhaps, or the weight of something not yet fully understood. Reth glanced at her again, studying her expression. You've been watching this, he said. Yes. For how long? She didn't answer immediately. Long enough. That's a concerning amount of time, he said. It was necessary. Was it? Yes. Reth nodded slowly, absorbing that without argument this time. Then after a moment he said, And you recognize me? Because of this? She looked at him directly now, her gaze steady, certain. No. Reth blinked once, then quietly. Then how? She stepped closer, the light shifting again, forming patterns that seemed almost still now, almost waiting. And then, with the same calm certainty she had carried since the moment she stopped him, she said, Because it was always you. Reth stared at her for a moment, the answer settling into something he hadn't expected. Then he let out a soft breath, a faint smile forming despite himself. That's not helpful, he said. I know. And for the first time since entering the chamber, the tension eased, not because anything had been resolved, but because something had been acknowledged. The light in the chamber did not return to its restless motion. It held almost steady, as if the system itself had decided to wait for something that could not be calculated. Reth stood there a moment longer, watching patterns that no longer tried to impress him. For the first time since entering, he stopped analyzing. That's new, he said quietly. Yes, Yeva replied. I usually don't stop looking for exits. There are none here. That's very comforting. It's not meant to be. Reth exhaled, a slow breath that seemed to settle something he hadn't realized was still moving. He glanced once more at the suspended light, then turned away from it entirely. That thing, he said, nodding toward the display, it predicts outcomes. Yes, and I disrupt them. Yes, that sounds like a problem. It was. Reth tilted his head slightly. Was? She met his gaze, steady as always. But something in it had shifted, not less certain, but less rigid. You left, she said. Everything adjusted around your absence. The system compensated. It created stability. That sounds like a success. It was incomplete. Reth frowned slightly. Incomplete how? It stabilized the structure, she said, not the direction. He let that settle, his expression sharpening just a fraction. So everything kept moving, he said slowly, but not necessarily where it was supposed to. Yes, that's familiar. You were always good at recognizing that. I was usually the cause of it. Yes. Reth almost smiled, but it softened into something quieter. And now I'm back, he said. Yes. And that fixes things. No. Reth blinked once. That's not encouraging. It changes things. That's slightly better. A faint shift of amusement passed through her expression, brief but unmistakable. Reth noticed. Of course he did. So the system doesn't know what to do with me, he said. No. And you brought me here anyway. Yes. That seems reckless. It's intentional. There it is again. It works. Reth shook his head slightly, then stepped closer. Not to the light, but to her. This time the movement wasn't cautious. It wasn't measured for escape. It was deliberate. I thought leaving would simplify things, he said. It didn't. I know that now. A pause, then quieter. I thought if I stayed gone long enough, whatever I left behind would stop mattering. It didn't. I know that too. The admission didn't feel heavy. It felt settled, like something that had finally stopped resisting. Behind them, the door opened silently. The guards remained where they were, but the corridor beyond had returned to its steady rhythm. No longer hesitant, no longer waiting. The system had resumed. Reth glanced toward the exit, then back at her. So what happens now? He asked. Yeva stepped slightly closer, closing the space that had remained between them since the corridor. Now, she said, we stop avoiding what was unfinished. Reth let out a quiet breath. That sounds complicated. It is. I was hoping for something simpler. You always do. I rarely get it. No. A faint smile touched her expression again, more visible this time. Reth noticed that too. Of course he did. He looked down briefly, then back at her, something in his posture shifting, not less guarded, but less distant. I'm not the same, he said. I know. You're not either. I know. That should make this harder. It doesn't. Why not? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out again. Not with urgency this time, not with the certainty of recognition, but with something quieter. Her hand found the edge of his coat again, the same place, the same motion, but different. Because we're not trying to return to what we were, she said. We're deciding what we are now. Reth held her gaze, the words settling into something that felt unexpectedly clear. That's new, he said. Yes. I don't usually decide things like that. I know. That's going to take some adjustment. You'll adapt. I usually do. A brief silence followed, but this one was light, almost easy. Reth glanced once more at the chamber behind them, the suspended light now slowly returning to its motion. No longer paused, no longer waiting. You know, he said. For something that predicts the future, it seems surprisingly unsure. It doesn't predict certainty, she replied. It predicts possibility. That's less impressive. It's more accurate. Reth considered that, then nodded slightly. Fair enough. He turned back toward the corridor, then hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of habit. Then he didn't. Instead, he stepped forward. Not away, not disappearing, forward. Yeva moved with him, not leading this time, not following either. Just moving alongside. Behind them, one of the guards exhaled quietly. Is that it? He whispered. The other shrugged. I think so. That was less catastrophic than expected. Give it time. Reth glanced back briefly. I heard that. Of course you did, the guard muttered. Your whispering technique needs improvement. We weren't trying to be subtle. That explains a lot. The guard frowned. Is he staying? Yeva answered without looking back. Yes. Reth tilted his head slightly. That was very confident. It was accurate. He let out a quiet breath, something close to a laugh. Well, he said, I suppose disappearing again would be repetitive. And predictable, she added. Reth nodded once. And we wouldn't want that. They continued forward, the corridor opening wider ahead, the systems no longer hesitating, no longer adjusting around absence. This time there was no need. Reth didn't look for exits. He didn't measure distances. He didn't calculate possibilities. For the first time in a long time, he simply walked, and he didn't step away.